Hi, and welcome to our 12th class on the Christian Basics, or for my Lutheran teenagers out there, Confirmation. Every week we try to bring you biblical content that will help you in your new or emerging walk with Christ. I'm Evan McClanahan. I'm the pastor down at First Lutheran in Houston. And this week I'm joined by Dr. Adam Harger of Houston Baptist University. He's an Old Testament professor, and as we continue to look at the Old Testament, he's going to join us for the next two videos to look at the prophets. Let's roll. All right, well, I'm joined by Dr. Adam Harger of Houston Baptist University. We're talking about the prophets. Who are the prophets? What are they? What do they do? So, Adam, let's just jump right in. Where we are in the Old Testament is, we've sort of got the land.
Okay.
We got the story of Joshua.
Okay.
The Israelites are there in the land. They're sort of fighting for what God has given them.
Excellent.
And at some point, these people called prophets come along and they start speaking for God.
Yes.
Let's give a quick word on the judges, though, because I actually don't have a video series on that, and there are books called Judges. So tell us what a judge is and how that's maybe different from the office of prophet, or sort of if it gives way, or how that works.
Yeah, so the judges, I mean, of course, we think judges, we think somebody behind a big desk banging a gavel sort of thing, making legal rules. But judges in the Bible were people who, if you read the story of Judges, there's this cycle of kind of idolatry and sin where the people turn away from God. And so as a result of that, they end up, coming into conflict with their neighbors and things like that, and they get oppressed. And so, of course, as we all do, when things are going bad, poorly, we cry out to God. And so they cry out to God, and God would send somebody called a judge. Okay. And the judges were all kinds of different people, and they, quote, judge Israel in different ways, but they're not really judging Israel. What they're doing is that usually the Spirit of God comes upon them, and they, through various means, deliver Israel from their oppressors. So you get some who are military leaders, and God kind of inspires them to, use a very small force to rout a very big army. Or you'll get other interesting characters like Samson, where God gives him this kind of supernatural strength. And of course, he's a really bad guy, so he's an interesting character. But really, a judge is somebody who God calls, places his Spirit upon them, and they sort of deliver Israel from their oppressors.
Gotcha. Yeah, Samson in particular is a story we should do a whole video on. Slaughters people with the jawbone of a donkey.
Yeah.
I believe.
Just remember, not everybody in the Bible is meant to be imitated. Yeah. Some of them are cautionary tales.
Yeah, sometimes it's prescriptive. That's like what you're supposed to do ongoing. Sometimes it's descriptive of like one guy who slaughters thousands of people with a jawbone of a donkey.
Yes.
But we're not to go look for jawbones, right? Like to slaughter people.
No,
with. Yeah.
I mean, I don't even know how that works.
Yeah.
To be honest with you.
I guess they can be pretty sharp.
Yeah.
Anyway. Okay, so you have judges, and then you've got this office of prophet. Now, I don't know if other religions had prophets or not, if that's sort of a usual word that would have been used.
Yeah.
And I don't know if in other religions those prophets were talking to, demonic beings or something like that, since I'm not sure that the God of the universe was talking through them. But when does someone start to kind of pipe up and say, "Hey, I'm speaking for Yahweh," the God of the Bible? Like, I don't know if there's a first one, or if it just sort of starts to happen.
Yeah. So you are right. There's tons of prophets across the world. So in the time of the Bible, all the religions and countries around them had prophets, and they're similar in the sense that a prophet is just somebody who speaks for a god.
Okay.
And so in Israel, those who speak for Yahweh, they start popping up pretty early in Israel's period. So one of the earliest ones we see, at least the big significant ones, is Samuel, who, interestingly enough, he plays the role of judge. He also plays the role of prophet, and then sometimes also plays the role of priest. So he's this interesting character that kind of leads Israel. But some of our other early figures you may have heard of are people like Elijah, Elisha, Nathan, and these are all these prophets that I've mentioned are ones who, they didn't leave us any writings, but we do have lots of stories about what they did.
Okay.
And so usually they were coming and they were speaking oftentimes a word of judgment. So if a king or somebody kind of gets out of line and God wants to kind of bring them back, he'll send a prophet to go talk to them.
Yeah. Now, how did Israel know if someone came along and said, "Hey, everyone, I'm a prophet. I have a word from God"? How did they sort of know? Did the prophet come with signs, or did they just speak in an authoritative way, or what? How would they sort of know? I guess.
Well, and that would have been really tough because there is one point in Deuteronomy where it says that you'll know a prophet if their word comes true.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's great, except if you're trying to make, say, a military decision or something in the present,
Yeah.
how do you know who to listen to? Because you're not going to know whether they were right until the
Right.
outcome at the end.
Right.
And so oftentimes you'd look at maybe their track record. So are these prophets who have been speaking for a while and they've always been right about what they're speaking? And sometimes it's just the reality of recognizing that the king or whomever should have known. They should know Yahweh better and know what Yahweh would want of them.
Yeah. If the prophet's like, "I'll tell you the prophecy, it'll cost you $500 or something like that,"
exactly.
That's probably a problem, right?
Right.
I mean, and actually we see that in our own day all the time, right?
Yeah.
People like, that are, out clearly in it for the money. They claim to speak for God. And in fact, I'll give an example. I clickbaited an article this week.
No, okay.
Yeah, it was dangerous. It was about a lotto winner who was sued by a pastor. I was like, well, I have to read this. I mean, Anyway, this girl won all this money, and this pastor came into her life and said God had told him to come into her life to help her, and then she promised to build a building for him or something, and it didn't, and he sued, and I don't know what happened. It doesn't really matter. But the point is, people still do this sort of thing all the time, right?
Yeah.
Where they're like, they claim to speak for God, and
Well, and think about a friend that you know really well. If if a third party came to you, said, "I've got a message from your friend," and they tell you something that you can't ever imagine your friend having said that, you would start to question that person. You'd be like, "Are you really coming from my friend?" And so people like kings in Israel, they were commanded to meditate on God's law and do all these other things. So they should have known.
Yeah. And you would think that the prophet would clearly be a person of integrity to where he's like, "Hey, look, I'm not doing this for any gain. I mean, this actually might cost me my life, but I'm telling you that this is what God has said."
Yeah, and a lot of them, they were imprisoned or they were beaten or other things. So they clearly weren't in it for some type of gain.
Yeah. Now, a prophet, too, when people hear that word, the first thing they think about is someone who tells the future.
Yes.
Now, we kind of hinted at this earlier.
Yeah.
So did the prophet walk around with a crystal ball? I mean, do they, use tarot cards or what?
Yeah, so they do a little bit. Their main goal is not future telling, and when they do, oftentimes it's things that are coming very soon. Okay. So they might tell a king or the nation, judgment's about to come, and here's why, because you've been unfaithful and these kinds of things. But that doesn't mean they don't sometimes speak about the far off future. And so this is where we see instances where we may talk about like messianic prophecy and things like that, where the prophets are not only looking at what's happening in Israel's life in the moment, but they're also looking kind of big picture and saying, well, what is God doing in the world and in creation about, fixing the nation, about bringing all the other nations under his rule and all these other kinds of things. And so that's when they start kind of pointing off to the future, which we eventually see kind of fulfilled in the person of Jesus.
Yeah.
And
so they speak to the future, but it's not always like this is going to happen. Sometimes it seems like if things don't change, this is the judgment that you're going to incur or something, right? And so then that happens because they don't change. So it's kind of like they predict the future, but maybe there could have been an alternative future.
Yeah. So look at somebody like Jonah, right? Jonah goes, he's called to go to Nineveh, which is not in Israel. It's the Assyrians. And they're actually pretty like Assyria as a nation at that time was pretty like oppressive and terrible. And so he's called to go to Nineveh and to speak judgment to them. And so he says, in so many days, God is coming to destroy you. And so they end up kind of crying out to God and in a sense repenting, and God doesn't send the judgment on them. Now, eventually they do get destroyed, but in that sense, you have to ask the question, was Jonah's, quote, prophecy then not true? Because it didn't happen. And I would say no, because it served a different function, right? It served the function of calling the people to recognize God, to repent and things like that. So prophecy, even future telling prophecy, can have other goals than just saying what's going to happen.
Gotcha. So in the case of Jonah ends with him having repented and been spared.
And he gets angry about it.
Yeah.
Because he's like, I don't like those Assyrians. I can't believe you forgave them.
He had to walk all the way across the town, so preaching a message to like the most evil people ever. And, it's probably having tomatoes thrown at him and whatnot. So
Right.
And let's just introduce a couple of names. We're going to do a second video that will look at some of these names maybe in particular, but maybe, for example, let's look at, I'll just throw out Samuel. You said maybe he's kind of one of the first. And so Samuel, because he's kind of a bridge, right, between the judge period and the king period. Is that right?
Yes.
So kind of talk about who he is and what he did and who are the major people and stories that he's kind of in the middle of. And that'll probably be all we do for this video.
Okay. So Samuel he's a leader in general. And as I said, he's kind of functioning in all these different ways. He's judge, he's prophet, he's just kind of leading Israel. And at this time, when they get into the land, they are united, but they're also kind of functioning as 12 separate tribes, right? They've got their land. They're, if they need to go to war or something, they'll help each other, but they're kind of self-governed to some degree. They're supposed to be under the law and things like that, God's law. So Samuel, he's at the sanctuary, the tabernacle of God. He's these kinds of things. He's speaking for God in many ways. But then when Israel cries out for a king, right, they want to be united in a different way, in the same way that the nations are around them. Samuel goes to God, and God basically says, don't feel rejected, Samuel, because it's not you they're rejecting me. And so God says, okay, well, give them a king. Let them know that that's going to come with a lot of stuff like taxation. He's going to take your children and make standing armies. He's going to do all these other things, and it won't necessarily be great, but fine, you can have it. So Samuel's role then changes to be more of what we think of as a prophet, and he becomes kind of the king maker and the king breaker. So he goes and he anoints the first king, Saul, and then when Saul ends up not working out very well, he goes and he anoints David, right? And so Samuel's role, you start to see the prophet and the king butting heads a little bit. Those two roles butting heads. And Samuel just sort of, he calls Saul, he calls David. He speaks to them for God.
There seemed to be in the Old Testament a fair number of sort of authority conflicts, kind of who's in charge here kind of thing. You
like
see
the rest of life.
Yeah, exactly. It's not so different. But Saul in particular, like he's anointed as the first great king. And we're going to do a couple of videos on the kings too. So we'll talk about that then, I know, as well. But, there is this thing of like, well, who kind of really speaks for God? And, Saul is, God's anointed. And yet now Samuel's saying, yeah, but, there needs to be a new king. So, but at the end of the day, the prophets, we would say, really are the ones with, I guess, more authority, if you will, because they really are speaking for God.
They're his messenger, right?
Yeah. Let's talk a little about Elijah. I think we have enough time to squeeze Elijah in. I know you could teach a whole class on Elijah. There's lots of great stories. And, he is really considered, I think it's safe to say, the greatest prophet. He's
right up there.
On the Mount of Transfiguration, it's Jesus, Moses, and Elijah. And we kind of think of that as the law and the prophets. Law and prophets is almost shorthand for the whole Old Testament, right? In a sense.
Yeah.
So, anyway, so if you have Moses and Elijah, so talk about Elijah. Where does he come from, and why is he so interesting?
So he's really interesting. He kind of pops on the scene during the reign of Ahab, who was was not a good king at all. Was a king of the north, married to a foreign princess named Jezebel, and she brings in a lot of idolatry and things. And there's a lot of, at certain points, they're hunting down Yahweh's prophets so that the prophets of Baal, can kind of fill those spots. And so Elijah comes on the scene, and his very first act is just to go tell King Ahab that, guess what, there's going to be a huge drought, and it's going to be really rough on the nation for a little while. And this is going to be a sign of who's really in charge, because Baal, who they were serving, is a storm god. And so Yahweh's going to come in and show that Baal can't help you.
So to be clear, Baal is the name of a false god.
He's a false god,
that other people were worshiping. Yahweh's the given name of the true God of the Bible. in the
Yes.
universe.
Yes,
So,
yes.
So Elijah's calling for faithfulness to Yahweh.
Yes.
And okay, so carry on.
Oh, yeah.
So drought.
So there's a
follows
drought, and then Elijah kind of goes, he has to go into hiding for a little while
Yeah.
because he's got to wait for the full effect of the drought to take. And so while he's in hiding, he performs several miracles, and he stays with a widow, and there's a, her son dies, and there's a raising the son. He's fed by ravens. There's all these kind of fun miracles that are happening. And then when the full effect of the drought has come in, he's called to return to the public sphere, and he issues this challenge where he takes on all the prophets of Baal, the false god, and he says, let's have a little showdown of gods. And so they go up on the top of this mountain, and they build these big like piles of wood, and they say, and Elijah says, okay, well, let's not light them. Let's just build the pile of wood, and we'll call to our gods. And whichever god, remember, like Baal is supposed to be a storm god, so he should be able to theoretically control lightning and all these kinds of things. Then surely, if Baal is the real god, he'll be able to light your fire.
Yeah.
And so, these prophets, they're dancing around, and they're cutting themselves, and they're doing all these things trying to get Baal to answer, and nothing happens.
Yeah.
And then finally, Elijah says, okay, well, my turn. But just to show off, right? He has all this water poured all over the wood. And then he prays to God in front of everyone, and then God answers by, striking the pile, and it lights up.
Yeah.
And so it's this moment where God kind of shows up and says, like, look, all these other gods you're worshiping can't do anything.
Yeah.
Like, I am the true God.
Yeah.
And then he's got a few interesting stories after that where he kind of, it's almost like his energy's spent, and Elijah runs off into the wilderness and just tries to hide from everything. And God meets him out there.
Yeah.
And kind of bolsters his confidence. So Elijah's just this really kind of cool figure, both in terms of the things he does, but also, in many ways he's a very relatable.
Yeah.
In terms of just like feeling on the outs and things like that.
Yeah. In the prophets, I don't mind saying that, what did Elijah do with those 450 prophets, I believe?
Oh yeah,
right,
he killed them.
Yeah, he killed them.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it is a humorous story, but at the same time, God takes this sort of thing very seriously.
He does.
God takes false prophecy very seriously. In fact, it is a death penalty offense in the Old Testament to claim to speak for God, but to do so knowing that you're not.
Yeah, because they're not only worshiping a different God, but they're leading other people away from the true God. Right.
So it's a very, very serious offense. And then Elijah had he had the task of hunting down those 450 prophets. I don't know, hunt down, but chase them and take care of them right then and there. There's also a kind of famous phrase that Elijah uses when he's down and out after this, right? He's worn out. He's tired of all of this. He thinks he's sort of the last faithful guy left in Israel, right? And God says what?
So God says, oh, no, you're not the only one. I've hidden, and this is what I should, is it 300, 400?
Yeah.
Some number of
a few thousand, I thought.
Maybe it's much more than that. Maybe it was 400 prophets of Baal that he slaughtered. Yeah. I'm terrible with numbers. But he does tell Elijah, like, look, you're not the only one. I mean, I've saved plenty of other prophets. Yeah. Yeah. And so he kind of reassures Elijah, like, look, you're not alone.
He says there are a certain number. I remember the number 6,000, but I might be wrong. But I don't know that it's prophets, but there are this number of people who have not bent the knee.
Faithful people.
Right? And so that's a way of saying, when you bend the knee, that's who you're worshiping, right?
Yeah.
So
because Elijah thought he was just alone entirely.
And there's definitely something to be said for that as well. I mean, it's kind of hard to imagine Christians in America thinking they're alone, but sometimes we do sort of think the world is out to get us, and, like everyone is chasing after, I don't know, YouTube gods or somebody else, other famous people or something, not the God of the Bible.
Well, and there are places in the world now where Christians do feel alone, right? I mean,
absolutely.
We have certain freedoms here that allow us to worship publicly, but there are places in the world where you can't.
For sure.
Well, so Elijah might be a nice...
Yeah, good thing to remember. Well, we'll end this video here, and thanks for watching. Well, thanks for joining us for the first of this two-part look at the prophets of the Old Testament. Remember that you can subscribe to this channel. That would help me out. Email me anytime, christianbasicsclass@gmail.com, or go to the website, flhouston.org, for all of the worksheets. And we're going to be looking at the prophets again in the following video. And until then, take care.